Last spring, the United Nations World Commission on the Environment published a report called Our Common Future. It was a frightening warning, another one, that our planet is on the brink of disaster because of how we abuse the environment, the mindless way we pollute our air and our water, and the criminal methods we use to dispose of our wastes. Tonight we bring you a story about how a group has been able to take action to reverse this trend, and they've done so successfully. And there's no reason why the methods they've used so well over the past several years can't be adapted everywhere to stop the mindless abuse of our environment. Cops from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. They're part of a special strike force, hunting down some of the most vicious killers in society.
There used to be a tanker truck down northbound on the roadway there. We'll swing in behind him and follow him, see where he goes. We'll stay about 500 feet above the ground and well behind him, and we'll mask our sound.
Their quarry, trucks that seem to be going innocently about their daily business, but it's a business that could be deadly.
They're hauling our tank. He ain't gonna get away from us.
What they're also looking for are industrial sites that are polluting the neighborhood.
PCBs are very hard to get rid of. It's very costly, and a lot of companies are illegally dumping these things, illegally storing them. It's a crime.
The crime, illegal disposal of toxic waste.
Illegal disposal is one of the most serious crimes that we're faced with in society today. We don't know the ramifications of what these chemicals are going to do to us, to our kids, to our pets, and the motivation for these crimes, I feel, is greed.
The unlawful discharge of toxic waste may result in cancer 10, 15, or 20 years from now. That's life-threatening. But because the effect is not felt immediately, it's not as if people are dropping in the streets on the day that they discharge these toxic wastes. People tend, human nature being what it is, not to take it as seriously as they should. But dead is dead, whether it's 10 years from now or it's tomorrow morning.
One of the worst examples was a gas station recently that dumped thousands of gallons of gasoline into the sewer system to get rid of it. And it was so bad that the combustion level in the neighboring community rose to 100%. We had to evacuate 200 people. And for a week or two after that, I received reports which showed that flames came out of people's sinks, and in a few cases, toilet bowl seats blew off toilet bowls. Now, that illustrates a society where chemicals are out of control.
Santa Monica Bay, California. Its sun and its surf are the envy of the world. But the waters of this bay have been used for years as a sink for the effluents of the people and the industries around its shores. The air they breathe is also among the most polluted in the world. Los Angeles has declared war on the polluters. It's using the courts to fight them and even put them in jail. Typical is the case prosecuted by the head of the Toxic Waste Strike Force, Barry Groveman.
One case that is really worth mentioning to show you how dangerous chemicals can be was the American Castor Company, which was a large company, over a couple hundred employees, that decided to, at the top level of the president, to dig trenches, cavernous holes in the ground, and bury over 254 containers of extremely flammable, ignitable waste into the ground. And there are pictures you can look at which show how outrageous this was, that this was pulled out of the ground. It was found by accident. A city worker who was repairing the street saw a mangled barrel pop up, and we were called in. We contacted the manufacturer of the chemical. He came to the scene and advised that we keep the fire department there all night with foam for fear that we would blow up the neighborhood while we excavated it. To me, it was worthy of the kind of sentence we eventually got, which was the president and the vice president, the two chief executive officers of that company, went to jail together for 6 months each. And in addition, lower-level employees were ordered to speak publicly on their crime and punishment, which is another type of punishment that I have sought, which is a little bit more creative to get the message out. They also cleaned up what they had done. They paid a substantial fine, and they were forced to put an ad in the Los Angeles Times advising the world and the community as to what they had done and why that risk was not worth taking. So from that ad alone, we bought millions and millions of dollars of deterrence.
District Attorney Ira Reiner.
The extent of the unlawful discharge of toxic waste is massive. It is simply physically impossible to catch and prosecute every major violator. And so what is necessary is to take one case and make an example of that person. That's called impact litigation. You find a serious violator and you come down on that person like a ton of bricks. They understand now, as they did not before, that if they're caught violating the law, they're not going to get away with a fine, but they're going to have to go to jail.
This is how it starts. A city sanitation crew, one arm of the toxic waste strike force, goes looking for evidence of illegal dumping into the sewers. A company has been under surveillance for weeks as a result of a phone tip. The effluent from the target company is monitored by instruments placed downstream from the company's discharge point. The instruments take a sample of effluent every 15 minutes. Its computerized monitors provide an accurate profile of the company's discharges into this particular sewer. They also indicate the exact time of the offense and the period of time over which the dumping has been taking place.
This violation that we caught, according to our pH strip chart here, would be approximately 6:30 in the morning for about 15 minutes. It looks as if the company has an acid discharge that's gone down to approximately 2.0 on the acid-base scale, which would be definitely a high acid violation. And that would characterize probably a felony violation of felony hazardous waste discharge. The downstream sewer here shows acid etching of the cement lining that has occurred over the, say, the last few years. The worst case that I've been involved in was we were monitoring this one company that had dumped cyanide out in quantities of up to 45 to 5,000 parts of free cyanide. And our limits on our ordinance are 2 parts.
City sanitation is responsible for monitoring 9,000 kilometers of sewers. Some convicted companies have had to install pre-treatment equipment. Already, there have been improvements. Fewer heavy metals have been found in the sewers and in the ocean sediment. With foolproof evidence, cases are settled before going to trial. The company simply pleads guilty. The emergency response team from County Health, investigating an abandoned industrial site. This has become an increasingly common way of disposing of hazardous material. A company just dumps its waste and simply walks away from it.
Try to get the one in the corner that's got the chlorinated solvents.
Dan Frescus is coordinator of investigation for the strike force, acting on an informant's tip.
So this is very typical. We get informants, either employees or ex-employees usually, that are just tired of being ordered to dispose of waste illegally, things that they know are illegal. Their conscience bothers them, and they finally just come forward and pick up the phone and call us in.
It's estimated that 90% of all hazardous waste is disposed of improperly or illegally. Some of these companies know they're taking a risk, but they cut corners because of the soaring cost of waste disposal, and what they leave behind is deadly. The team must check the site carefully to find out how dangerous these discarded wastes are. The samples taken from the barrels are tested on the spot for flammability and combustibility.
You can see that this is positive, that will maintain combustion.
Soil samples reveal any chemical seepage, which may end up in the groundwater. And the TLV sniffer sounds a warning of dangerous gases.
The beeping means that the hydrocarbon concentration in the hole is at the explosive limit. If you did ignite this particular atmosphere in here, it would explode.
Oh, yeah, you can just scoop some off the top, too.
Yeah, this
We're going for a 5-foot sample right now just to see how much the solvents have migrated into the soil. It's probably a blend of different types of materials. There's everything up there from plating waste to heavy metals to corrosives to flammables, including some resins, which are very toxic.
The atmosphere around some of these sites is so volatile, a spark will ignite it, and gas levels inside the barrels can build up to such a point that they could explode.
We've got everything here. We've got perchloroethylene, trichloroethylene, methylene chloride acids at a very low pH of pHs of 0, which is the most concentrated acid you can get. Okay.
The strike force found oil and diesel spilled on the ground. Most of the abandoned PCBs were in barrels, but some had leaked out of capacitors found on the roof, part of which may have to be replaced. The owner of Industrial Salvage contaminated a second site. He has been charged with water pollution and illegal storage, abandonment, and disposal of hazardous waste. If found guilty, the owner could be sentenced to a maximum of 4 years in prison and a fine of $200,000. Using the full force of law against polluters does work. The man who started the strike force, District Attorney Ira Reiner.
Corporate executives do not regard themselves as a common criminal. Now, a burglar, he expects when he's caught, he's going to have to go to jail. That's part of the business that he's in. But a corporate executive expects that when his corporation violates the law through his acts, that the corporation is simply going to pay a fine. He doesn't expect to go to jail and hear that slammer close behind him. And so a 90 or 180-day sentence can have a tremendous chilling effect in a corporation when it's the president who's doing those 3 to 6 months in jail. 90 or 180 days may seem like a vacation to a burglar, but it's not a vacation to the chairman of the board.
Todd Shipyards, one of the largest corporations prosecuted by the city's strike force. It's one of the biggest shipyards in the United States and a major defense contractor. It was charged with illegal storage, transportation, and disposal of PCBs. The case against Todd began before the law was strengthened to make pollution a felony offense.
We prosecuted that case under our laws, which provide only for a misdemeanor penalty. That's a maximum of 1 year in jail. They made an effort to have our case removed from local courts into the federal courts, where their executives were in jeopardy of 5-year sentences. Why did they do that? Why did they try to get away from a misdemeanor to a major felony in federal court? Well, the answer is clear. Although the law provides for felony prosecution in federal court, in point of fact, no one ever does a day in jail, and they understood that.
Todd Shipyards hired 20 lawyers, including a former judge, to fight that case. It had disposed of leaking transformers by having them taken away by a scrap dealer. He spilled the PCBs on the road and broke up the transformers in his scrapyard.
So you have a very large corporation engaging in conduct that can be, indeed, is life-threatening for one reason and one reason only, and that is to save money. $50,000 to some, a large sum, but to a corporation that size, truly nickels and dimes.
And they seem to be getting a heavy amount of solvent in these wells.
Teamwork is the key to successful prosecution. 11 agencies meet every week to coordinate the work of the strike force, to pool evidence and plan searches of suspect companies.
If you guys went out there yesterday to look at that.
Cases originate with citizen tips or complaints, or with the agencies themselves, the DA's office, police, health, and sanitation. The force has had an almost 100% success rate in court.
What we're talking about is a discharge of oily material of about 2.5 million gallons. We were looking at to determine whether or not it was hazardous. Roger ran some tests to see whether or not the stuff would kill fish.
It killed half the fish.
Okay.
Oils usually don't kill fish that fast, but this particular oil sample did.
The solvents, what it is that they're producing in that plant.
You're talking an oil refinery that makes everything.
They're talking about Arco, one of the biggest oil companies in the world.